So it's great to be able to have this opportunity to share with you, brothers, about the missionaries of God's love. So this will be a series that we're prepared to seek to introduce you to what we call a radical way of love. And we're using this book, The Radical Way of Love, actually, in these talks. So hopefully you'll read the book as well as I'm giving the talks, and that will help you to come to a deeper appreciation of who we are. But before actually giving the content from the book, I wanted to firstly, in this first talk, just simply talk about the MGL identity, because we are in some ways a rather complex identity and very different in the church to any other group. And so it's important to understand our identity. The way I want to do that is to share with you this image of the concentric circles. So on the outside circle, you'll notice that we are Catholic. And then as you go to the circle inside of that, you'll notice that we're charismatic. And when you go to the circle inside of that, you notice that we belong to a community, the Disciples of Jesus community. And go inside of that, and then of course we are the MGLs. And then inside of that, most of us are priests. So I want to sort of talk about identity in that way, the various layers to our identity. So the most general layer, of course, is that to be an MGL, you need to be Catholic. That's fundamental. That is, you're baptized, confirmed, and entered into Holy Eucharist. If you'll notice down the bottom part of the circles, you'll find the way in which you enter into each particular layer of this identity. So to be Catholic, you need to be baptized, you need to be confirmed, and you need to be a participant in the Eucharist. They're the three sacraments of initiation into the church. So when someone comes into full membership in the Catholic Church, say from another church or ecclesial body, they need to go through being confirmed at least and entering into Eucharist. If someone comes from having no Christian background, they need to be baptized, confirmed, and enter into Eucharist. So we presume then that you are in that category, that you're a Catholic. And I'm sure that you love the church. And so we very much, as missionaries of God's love, seek to have our brothers deepen in their identity as Catholics. So it's something that we're very strong on, that we'd be very much part of the Catholic Church. We have a love for the Pope and for our bishops and for those who are the hierarchy within the church. And we want to serve the church. We have a great love for the Catholic Church. So that's our first identity. And that means that you'll receive a lot of teaching from the Catholic Catechism somewhere along the line and from other sources about Catholic teaching, because you'll need to understand more what it is to be Catholic and what it is that we believe and that we place our lives under. So that's the first dimension that's important in your formation as a missionary of God's love. The second dimension is within that broad Catholic reality, and that is the charismatic grace, the grace of the charismatic renewal. And you notice that to become into the charismatic renewal, you are baptized in the Spirit, right? So we're going to talk about that soon. Actually, in the next talk, I hope to present on this whole grace of the renewal and baptism in the Spirit, and share my own experience of this. So it's very important to understand that we have been birthed out of the grace of this baptism in the Spirit, which is the widespread experience now within the Catholic Church of a renewal of your sacramental baptism and confirmation. And And so it changes us and distinguishes us a little bit in the church, because this renewal movement now is very large. We've been birthed in the context of the renewal that's been brought into the church, called the New Pentecost movement, since the Second Vatican Council. So that's the second dimension of our identity. So to be an MGL, you need to be Catholic, and you also need to be charismatic. That is very open to the charismatic gifts, which of course flow out of this experience of being baptized in the Holy Spirit, the new outpouring of the Spirit that I'll talk about later and explain to you more. Okay? So then the third level of identity is that we are members, all members of a lay-led community called the Disciples of Jesus community. Now, this is a covenant community, and I'll explain later too how covenant communities developed in the life of the church. As a result of this grace of the baptism in the Spirit, men and women who were experiencing this in the United States began to sort of feel that they needed to be committed together in community life, so that the grace of the baptism of the Spirit could be really lived richly in a way of life that would be to the glory of God, and also shared with others through the work of evangelization. So these communities developed for that purpose. So as a community it developed here in Australia, it was originally called the Hepzibah community, which means God's delight. And so it was in the context of that community, after I joined it, and others did too, we've experienced the missionaries of God's love come forward. So we have remained as members of this community. So to be in the missionaries of God's love, you need to be a member of the Disciples of Jesus community. Now, when you enter the community, the lay community, you first make an underway commitment, which is an initial commitment to live the life of the community and share in its mission and that sort of thing. But then members of the community later, after a few years, will have the opportunity to make a covenant commitment. So it's called a covenant community. And so we, as aspirants towards the mission, become members of the missionaries of God's love, it's necessary for us to be members of this lay community, and also that we would actually be covenant members before becoming full members of the missionaries of God's love. So that's an important part of a dimension of our experience. And it's a great benefit to us to belong to this community. We were birthed out of the experience of the community when 3 young men just came and they said, I want to be a priest, but I want to stay part of this community. And that's how we began, which I'll speak about later. So it's important for you to understand then that our membership in the covenant community is part of our identity as well. And so brothers who come to join us will also receive a certain amount of formation into the life of the lay community. Of course, we become priests, and so we're not only confined to the community. We become priests for the world, for the church and the world, the church's mission in the world, not just for the community. But we see our membership within the community as very important for our own lives and for the way that we live our lives, and for our own stability, and the support that we gain from the community is really immense, really. So that's another level of our identity then that would take a while for you maybe to come to understand, because if you come from another culture other than the Australian culture, you'll find that maybe you haven't experienced anything like this before. These evangelical lay communities within the Catholic Church are new. They have the highest level of endorsement from the Pope himself, but they're new, and sometimes people haven't experienced this sort of thing and find it rather strange. And that why would a body of priests belong to a lay community? It seems strange, doesn't it? But what happened is I came and joined the community, and then from that, then the other guys felt the call to be priests within the life of the community. And then from that, we've developed the Missionaries of God's Love, which retains that strong intrinsic link with the community. We see our membership of the community as essential to our identity. And so we don't want to relinquish that, even though our ministries go way beyond the life of the community, of course, as priests. We minister within the life of the church for the sake of the world. But we always remain that with that intrinsic link in our identity, who we are as members of Disciples of Jesus community. And I'll explain too why the name change. We first were called Hepzibah, and then our name changed to Disciples of Jesus. But that will be explained later. Okay, so then to be an MGL, the identity then, you certainly need to be Catholic. You also need to be charismatic, and you need to be a member of the Disciples of Jesus covenant community. And so then, within that whole broad scene of Catholic, charismatic, covenant community, we have specifically the identity then of the Missionaries of God's Love, we have our own, of course, constitutions and our own identity, their own way of life and mission within that context. And so, as I said, to join the covenant community, of course, you need to make that covenant commitment. But of course, ultimately, you join Missionaries of God's Love by taking or professing vows. First of all, initial vows after a couple of years, and then after another 5 years after that, you have the opportunity of professing final vows, or we call them perpetual vows, really, which are lasting vows for your life. So that's so coming into the life of the Missionaries of God's Love, of course, then. And this is what this course is really about, specifically talking about the ideals, the vision, the mission of the Missionaries of God's Love as such. That's what this particular course is about. But I want to put it in the larger context so that you understand that. And so the first few talks will be about the charismatic dimension, and then there'll be further talk about the life of the covenant community and that dimension. And then after that, we'll talk more specifically about the MGL charism and what we bring to the life of the church and what we believe the Lord has given to us to bring to the life of the church. And we'll talk about what our vows mean of poverty, chastity, and obedience. And we'll talk about our way of prayer, a very distinctive way of prayer in all its various dimensions. And we'll talk about also our way of community, our way of being brothers together in the Lord, and how we understand that. We always live in brotherhood houses, not by ourselves. And then we'll talk also about the specific characteristics of our mission as missionaries of God's love. So that's the series. That's what we're going to be sort of talking about. And then eventually we'll also talk about what it means to be a priest of the Missionaries of God's Love, because you see, you can be a missionary of God's love brother and take vows in initial vows and final vows, and you can remain as a consecrated brother, and some do. Relatively few actually do remain as consecrated brothers. Most actually become priests. That's why we've become a clerical religious institute, because the clerical religious institute, separate from a lay religious institute, it's distinguished from a lay from that because in our foundations, the call to priesthood was fundamental, and that's why we're a clerical religious institute. But we do have brothers with us as well who are equal to us in every way, but they're not ordained. And so we will talk towards the end of this series about what it means to specifically be ordained within the Missionaries of God's Love and to be an ordained priest. Because you'll notice in those first, all those first four circles, Catholic, Charismatic, Covenant Community, MGL, MGL Brother, they're all not clerical, right? And so when we form people, we form you first to be a strong disciple of Jesus within, under the charismatic grace, within the Disciples of Jesus community, and then also a strong religious brother within the Missionaries of God's Love before you become a priest. So we don't want guys coming to us and saying, oh, I just want to become a priest and that's why I'm here. That's not good enough for us, because yes, if you have a calling to be a priest, that's wonderful. And we want to take you and form you towards being a priest. But before you ultimately become a priest, we want to form you in the way of discipleship first, because the best priests are those who are really good disciples of Jesus, rather than just becoming a priest for a title or for a bit of power or authority or something. No, we want you to be a genuine priest who's coming out of the experience of being formed as a disciple, and to be formed too in religious life, which is a life of poverty, chastity, and obedience. So the whole experience of being consecrated to God is a gift of consecration to Him, which is available to all, not just priests. And so we want you to be formed first in your identity as an MGL before becoming a priest, because we're distinct from diocesan priesthood. Diocesan priests simply ordained by the bishop for the sake of working in a diocese in a particular parish, etc. That's one way of being a priest. But we're not like that. We've been consecrated to the Lord first in poverty, chastity, and obedience, in that radical way of life, a radical way of love, as we call it here. We've been formed in that first. And that's what identity that we want to take on first. And then, having taken on the MGL identity, as a missionary of God's love, you get ordained. And then that shapes your way of being a priest. So you're not a priest like diocesan priests, but you're a missionary priest, a very different style of priest than we may work in a parish, and some of our guys are working in parishes, but not as a diocesan priest, but with a whole missionary outlook that comes in a whole way of life that backs it up, which is our missionary of God's love way of life, a way of prayer and a way of being brothers together. We never send anyone out by themselves. A lot of diocesan priests will be sitting in Australia anyway in their presbytery by themselves. We will never allow that to happen. We'll always have a community. So we're very different from the diocesan priesthood, and we complement, of course, the diocesan priesthood. The diocesan priesthood is a very good calling, but to come to the missionaries of God's love, you have to think differently. You have to come to a different way of living out priestly life. So all of that will get explained as we go along. So I hope this has really helped as an initial presentation on what it is to be a missionary of God's love. And the way in which in our formation then we'll be forming you to be a really good Catholic, we trust, to be a really good charismatic, where you're open to the gifts of the Spirit and moving in the gifts of the Spirit, and also to be a really good person in community life with lay people. So we work together with lay people, not sort of over on top of and above lay people, but we work alongside of and with lay people. And then, of course, a good MGL, we're good in poverty, good in chastity, good in obedience, and good in a whole range of prayer life, especially before Jesus and the Blessed Sacrament, and also good in brotherhood life, and of course good in mission, the work of evangelization. So we really want to sort of form people in that holistic way, which is a very different type of identity, you see, than what most guys, when they go into a seminary, would be formed in. And so we don't want you to be sort of just having like a seminarian type of mentality, as if you're going to be a diocesan priest. We want you to sort of have more like a communal mentality. We don't want you also either to have like an institutional mentality that you're sort of going to come to this big institution or something like that, where you'll just be one individual in this institution. No, you come to a community, you come to a brotherhood, and you become one of the brothers. And then within the context of that brotherhood, you discover more deeply the love of the Lord, and you want to bring the Lord's love to as many people as possible. So it's that type of approach that we have, which is really the approach of Jesus. When Jesus called his apostles at the very beginning, he called them first of all to be with him. To be with him. That's like in prayer and brotherhood. And then he sent them out to evangelize, right? So that's what we're seeking to have happen with ourselves, to just come together in prayer and brotherhood, and then to be sent wherever he will send us in the work of evangelization and bringing the good news of God's love to as many people as possible before we die. God bless you.